All right, today is November 15th. Anthony Magnabosco is around town and he's doing his Street Epistemology thing again, so let's see how it goes between me and him.
Nice to meet you. How are you? I appreciate your courageousness to do that.
Anything that'll better the academic community. It's what I do.
Oh, cool. What are you studying here?
My major is computer science, cybersecurity.
Cool. Did you also find yourself programming and learning about computer science before
I
decided to study it?
Yeah.
What claim do you tend to make because you think that it's true that we can explore together?
Jesus is God and that he rose from the dead.
That's two claims.
Okay.
Well,
Fair.
we can go with either one, or we can sort of combine them, I suppose. Is one dependent on the other?
Jesus is God, yes, it's dependent on Jesus rose from the dead.
He wouldn't be
Wait.
God if he didn't rise from the dead?
That's correct. There has to be some sort of quantification of proof, right, that he is God.
Okay. I would think that a person couldn't raise from the dead unless they were God.
The causation is that because he is God, but in order for us to determine whether,
I see. The reason why you can say God is real is because you're sure he rose from the dead.
Not necessarily. That's just one of my many examples.
Okay.
Like, there's intelligent design, there's the cosmological argument, things of that like nature.
I would like to talk about the reason that gives you the most confidence that it's true and would result in the greatest drop in your confidence that it's true if you discovered that it's not a good reason. If Jesus rose from the dead is the reason, if you discover that you don't have a good reason for thinking that Jesus rose from the dead, and you say, if I discovered that, I would drop the greatest. My drop,
Absolutely, I would deconvert from Christianity.
what if you found no good reason for thinking that it was true?
That would be the same thing, I guess.
If you discover that you have no good reason for thinking that Jesus rose from the dead, it would significantly impact your confidence that Jesus was God.
Yes.
How much of a drop in confidence are we talking about? Would it knock you down from a 100 to a 97?
Yeah, it would be pretty low. Less than 50 for sure. Something.
Well, that would probably be a really good reason to explore that. If it would have that much of an impact in your confidence that Jesus is God, then I think we should definitely explore how you determine that Jesus rose from the dead. I guess since we've identified the real reason, or at least a very important reason for thinking that this is true, can we explore the steps that you use to get to your conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead? I assume we're talking about Jesus Christ, the Christian,
Yes.
the Son of
Jesus.
God, right?
Jesus, the one that everyone's talking about.
Yeah. And not to be pedantic, but what does it mean to be dead?
To be dead means that what keeps you conscious in the real world is no longer intact.
In order for somebody to rise from the dead, would they also have to be dead?
Yes.
Okay. I'm actually seriously wondering about this. I'm honestly curious.
Sure.
Do we need to first discuss how you concluded that he was dead before we can decide?
Yeah, sure. He existed, he was crucified, and that he preached for the kingdom of God.
There's 40 sources that say that he existed. Do those same 40 say that he also rose from the dead?
Well,
Or are they just talking about his existence?
well, we're first establishing, correct me if I'm wrong, but that he died first, right?
There's 40 sources that claim that he...
Independent sources.
Are they claims or are they proofs? Are they evidences?
When you were born knowing nothing, right?
Before I agree to that, I think I need to understand what you mean by no things.
I think it would be a mistake to say that I know all of health science because I'm a human being, and health science is part of me. So there definitely has to be some cognitive faculty that is engaged with that. So my point is that I'm saying is that when you're born, you're not born with logical principles. You learn those along the way. So if you're born with things that you learn along the way, then that means that the way that we formulate our deductive principles is primarily through induction.
Do you have an example of a human who might be coming to knowledge through induction?
Yes. So as soon as someone were to step out of their sight, they're not conscious of the fact that they exist until
Oh, I
they
see.
develop that.
Like a kid might start crying when they see mommy or daddy walking away because their brains haven't developed yet to the point where they can deduce.
I wouldn't speak for every kid, but like, up until 4. We use induction to come to the most probable, most reliable, most accurate conclusion.
Is that where the 40 sources come in?
Yes. Because if someone has 40 sources backing up their crucifixion, what they preached, and who they were, then most likely, a lot likely, he definitely was crucified and existed. I think it was, what's his name, John Dominic Crossan, head of the Jesus Seminar. He says that Jesus' existence and crucifixion are as sure as anything in history. And it's because of this reason that you go to any good academic institution and they will tell you Jesus for sure existed.
Here's what I'm wondering though, when I hear people talk about induction and sources. Could it be demonstrating that that's what these people thought was true at the time, and yet may not be true in reality?
Yeah, so you need to have essentially counter sources.
Counter sources to show that it wasn't true?
Yes, you need evidence to show that he did not exist in lieu of the evidence we currently have that show that he most likely for sure existed. Once I've established my case, now it's the opposing side's turn.
This is what I hear you saying. We have 40 sources that say people say that Jesus rose from the dead.
Some of them, a good number of them say that he rose from the dead, because some of them are Christian. But like, I'll give you an example. Tacitus, right? He's not a Christian, but he says that a malevolent superstition broke out in Jerusalem where the first evil had been birthed or something to that extent. When he's talking about this figure called Christus, referring to Jesus.
This is one of the 40 examples
Yes.
that you would say is a source.
Yes.
And here's what I'm wondering though.
Sure.
It almost sounded like you were saying we can be confident in sources that say things are true if there are no other sources that say that those things aren't true. I'm not really an expert in biblical sources.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Let me put it this way. And they're not all biblical, by the way.
There's extra biblical sources
To corroborate.
to corroborate the claims that people made at that time that they think Jesus rose from the dead.
40 sources is a lot, like I'm telling you, it's a lot. Especially once you talk about, like, within a few years, you can get back to Jesus. So
If there were 80 sources, would we be more justified in accepting the claim?
we would be more justified, but we would still, in both scenarios, you would have to necessarily conclude that Jesus existed because it is more probable than all the other possibilities regarding his existence and crucifixion.
What is increasing the probability that what you're thinking is true? Are the 40 sources influencing the probability that the claim that Jesus rose from the dead is true?
One individual source is not going to do anything.
Is there any chance that people could have thought that something was true, that Jesus rose from the dead, and were writing about it, things that we consider sources today, and it's confirming that that's what they thought, but it not really be the case?
Yeah, so
that it's not true in reality.
So then it goes back to probabilities. Do people have hallucinations? Do people lie under these circumstances? And so you have to look at the evidence.
Are those the only two explanations?
You know, it's funny because, like, I've surveyed the literature thousands of times. I've watched so many debates. I've spoken to scholars myself, and the ones who don't agree with Jesus rising from the dead always say the same thing. They say, we don't know. They don't want to commit to a conclusion because they know that can easily be knocked down by the current theory we have.
It almost sounded like you were saying that there are people who will come up with ways to not accept your evidence because they don't want to believe the claim.
The drive point home is that the alternative explanations, as you were saying before, although there are a lot to choose from, none of them are really good. It's a mile wide, inch deep. The best way to know that Jesus rose from the dead is what Gary Habermas calls the minimal facts argument, what Michael Kona calls the historical bedrock, what all scholars will agree on, regardless of whether they're Christian, atheist, agnostic, whatever belief system they have. They will agree on these things, that Jesus for sure existed and was crucified under Pontius Pilate.
Is it because of the sources? Is that why they think this?
Yes. His disciples, his followers, had the conviction that he rose from the dead very early on, right after his crucifixion, and that the main leaders of the apostles, and I'm speaking about Peter, Paul later came, he wasn't a Christian, but he converted to Christianity after having an experience of what he called the risen Jesus. James, the brother of Jesus, that one was recorded in somewhere in Joseph's Antiquities of the Jews.
When I read a story, and even if 40 people corroborate it, and let's say they've corroborated over, I don't know how many years, whatever, I might be willing to consider it, but I don't think I'd be willing to accept it as factually true.
So then, I'm reminded of the time when Kenneth Humphreys confronted Gary Habermas on what's the difference between Jesus and Snow White. And the difference is that no one is, even though Snow White is being talked around and corroborated per se, a story that is not to be taken true, but instead to derive some sort of entertainment.
We can be fairly confident that the sources are a source of knowledge because people believed that it was the case, that they believed that it was true. Whereas with Snow White, we don't have people running around saying that they believe that she rose from the dead. And because of that distinction, we are on solid footing for accepting the sources as evidence.
To an extent, I'll say yes.
Well, that's a good chat.
When's the next time you'll be around?
That's a good question. Maybe next week, if the weather's decent.
Next week? All right.
It's very courageous for him to come up to talk to me about that, particularly because it is being recorded. And if you're familiar at all with what I do, I tend to ask very tough questions. So I admire you coming up to me to explore that with me.
And I admire you for asking the brave questions that are kept low-key, a lot of you.
It can be tough to keep it low-key. Sometimes you can feel like your emotions getting in the way, but you have to kind of tamp them down for the purpose of the exploration. And then you meet some people who say, well, God is love. God is this feeling that I get. I actually interviewed 2 Mormons an hour and a half ago who believe in different gods. And what's interesting is that they give a lot of the same reason. They were willing to die for it. But when we get down to the real reasons why, they're not often much different, which is one of the reasons why I don't really believe in any gods.
Well, we can definitely save this discussion for later, but
Would you like
I wouldn't agree at all that we have the same reasons, because for one thing, I don't think things of that nature, and was able to answer all of the questions.
You don't think I would remember somebody who answered the questions?
Or at least that it would be very rare.
No. I tend to remember many of the people I talk to, or at least the conversations.
With a collegiate level of understanding. Not just answering just for the sake of answering.
Oh, do you think that your responses were better than the typical responses I might get?
Absolutely.
I might have a talk with somebody who gives a reason that is a crazy reason in many people's eyes. But 40 people watching that encounter might say that's the same reason that I'd give to that guy if he interviewed me. And it causes them to take another look at their beliefs and find better reasons for holding their views.
I will be available for those of you watching. I will send my contact information below if you guys have any questions. And I suppose he has the same thing. Street Epistemology. This is Anthony Magnabosco.
Thank you very much. My name is Anthony. Thank you for coming up to me and sharing your views and giving these reasons why you think that this is all true.
3 days later.
I don't waste a lot of my time putting together a video or videos of our dialogues that might jeopardize the work that I'm doing. That might jeopardize the work that I'm doing. That might jeopardize the work that I'm doing.